On the planet of Zaladar, a war raged in the skies and on the ground. The queen, a powerful leader of the Tyleth people, stood at the front lines of a fierce battle. Her people were losing, and the enemy's forces were closing in fast. We're a proud, noble species with technology far ahead of humans, but even they were not prepared for the brutality of the war. Queen Valara, a tall and regal alien, stood on a cliff looking over the battlefield, her heart heavy with grief. Her golden armor shimmered under the redoring sky, but her thoughts were far from the battle. Her daughter, Princess Lyra, had been captured by the enemy forces. The enemy, a vicious and heartless race known as the Varen, had taken her during an attack days earlier. Valara's face was a mask of determination, but behind her eyes there was pain. Her people's future was in danger, and her daughter, the heir to the throne, was lost in the hands of their greatest enemies. The queen had spent every moment of her life preparing for this battle, but nothing had prepared her for the pain of losing her own flesh and blood. "Your Majesty," a voice called from behind her. Valara turned to see one of her most trusted generals, Kalen, walking toward her. He was a strong warrior, his body covered in the scars of countless battles, but today his face was grim. He could feel her pain, but he had duties to attend to. "The enemy has pushed us back again. We are running out of time," Kalen said. His voice was steady, but Valara could hear the fear in his words. "I cannot focus on the war right now." Kalen, Valara replied, her voice a mixture of strength and sorrow. "My daughter is out there. I have to bring her home." Kalen nodded, understanding. "I know, but we need you here. We need your strength. The battle is far from over." Valara's heart ached. She'd spent her life leading her people, but now her world felt like it was falling apart. She had given everything to her kingdom, and now her daughter was in danger. It was a pain she had never known before. A pain she wasn't sure she could bear. "I can't think about this war until—" "My daughter is safe," Valara said firmly. She stepped away from the cliff and turned toward Kalen. "Need word to our allies. I need help. I will do whatever it takes to get Lyra back." Kalen hesitated, but then nodded. "As you command, Your Majesty." Far away, on a warship stationed near the edge of the galaxy, a human soldier stood on the deck, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. His name was Sergeant James Carter, and he had been assigned to the Tyleth forces as part of an intergalactic alliance. Carter had seen his fair share of battles, but nothing had prepared him for what he would face now. He had joined the military years ago, hoping to serve his country and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He had been a soldier in Earth's wars, but this war, it felt different. The enemy was unlike anything he had encountered before, and the stakes were higher than ever. The Tyleth, despite their advanced technology, were losing the war. And now, their queen's daughter had been taken. Carter clenched his fist around the railing of the ship, his thoughts turning to the mission at hand. He was part of a small human unit stationed near the Tyleth stronghold. His team had been tasked with assisting in the defense of the planet, but the war had taken a toll. The Varen were relentless, and their forces seemed to grow stronger by the day. The Tyleth queen had sent a desperate plea for help. Her daughter, Princess Lyra, was being held captive by the Varen. And now it was Carter's turn to step up. As he stood there, watching the stars, his mind wandered back to his own family. His mother, father, and little sister, I thought about. How lucky he was to have them, to know they were safe. But here in this alien world, things were different. He had no family in the Tyleth kingdom. He had no personal connection to them, yet he understood their pain. He knew what it was like to lose someone important. He couldn't let the queen's daughter suffer the same fate. The call had come through. He was to lead a small team into enemy territory. It was a dangerous mission, but Carter was ready. It had no choice. If the Tyleth lost their queen's daughter, the consequences could be devastating. Back on Zaladar, Valara was preparing for the worst. She had gathered a small group of her best soldiers and set out to find her daughter. They moved quickly through the night, their cloaks blending into the shadows as they passed through the enemy lines. The terrain was harsh, but Valara was determined to succeed. Every step she took brought her closer to the enemy's stronghold. Her heart raced with every passing moment. She had to find Lyra. She couldn't let the Varen destroy everything she had worked for. Valara's mind raced as she thought about what might happen if she couldn't bring her daughter back. The enemy had been known to take prisoners and use them for their twisted experiments, and she feared for Lyra's safety. Her daughter was kind and compassionate, but she was also powerful. If the Varen harmed her, it would be the end of their kingdom. As they reached the enemy's stronghold, Valara signaled her team to stop. She took a deep breath and looked up at the walls that surrounded the prison. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. "Prepare yourselves," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. Her soldiers nodded, their weapons ready. Valara stepped forward, leading the charge. The battle ahead would be hard, but it was a fight she had to win. Meanwhile, Carter's team had made its way into the heart of the enemy's territory. They moved silently through the dense jungle, the tension palpable. They were nearing the stronghold where Princess Lyra was held, and Carter's heart beat faster with each step. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready for whatever came. As they neared the prison, Carter spotted the same familiar glow in the distance. The same lights that had drawn him to this mission in the first place. It was the enemy's fortress, a massive structure built into the side of a mountain. "Ready," Carter muttered to his team. He gave a final signal, and they moved forward, into the shadows, preparing to rescue the princess and bring her home. The story of Queen Valara and Sergeant James Carter had only just begun. Stakes were high, but the bond between them would become stronger with each passing challenge. The battle for the princess, for their people, and for their hearts was about to unfold in ways neither of them could ever have imagined. The dense jungle echoed with the sounds of distant wildlife, but the human soldiers moved in complete silence. Their footsteps were soft, and the air was thick with tension. Sergeant James Carter led the team, his senses sharp, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, and every rustling leaf. The mission was clear. Get in, rescue the princess, and get out. It wasn't going to be easy. As they moved deeper into enemy territory, Carter's mind raced. The Varen were ruthless. They didn't care about diplomacy or honor. They only cared about power and control. It was one of the reasons why Carter had joined this mission. He knew that the Tyleth needed help. But there was something else. Something that made this mission different from all the others he had been on. He thought about the Tyleth Queen. She was unlike any leader he had ever seen, strong, regal, and filled with a determination that could move mountains. She had sacrificed so much to keep her people safe, and now her daughter, Princess Lyra, was in the hands of their enemies. Carter felt a deep sense of responsibility to help her. He wasn't just saving a princess. He was saving the heart of a kingdom. The jungle began to thin out, and the group found themselves at the base of a towering cliff. The fortress was just ahead, hidden by layers of trees and natural rock formations. The soldiers took cover, crouching low to the ground, their breaths steady. Carter held up a hand, signaling them to stop. He peered through the foliage toward the massive walls of the enemy's stronghold. The lights of the Varen fortress flickered in the distance, casting a harsh glow that cut through the dark night. "That's our target," Carter whispered. His voice was calm, but inside, his pulse was racing. Couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Varen were always one step ahead. The team moved swiftly and silently, their black uniforms blending with the shadows. Carter's mind kept drifting to the princess. What was she feeling? Was she scared? Alone? He pushed the thoughts away and focused on the task at hand. There was no room for doubt or hesitation. As they reached the outer walls of the fortress, Carter motioned for his team to take cover. He glanced around, searching for an opening. The structure was heavily guarded, but there had to be a way in. He knew that time was running out. The longer they stayed in the jungle, the more likely it was that the Varen would discover their presence. "Stay low and move fast," Carter instructed his team. They nodded and followed his lead. Their bodies pressed against the cold stone of the fortress. Carter felt a familiar weight in his chest. It was the feeling he had before every battle, nervous energy mixed with a sense of purpose. But this time it was different. This time, he wasn't just fighting for Earth. He was fighting for something bigger. He was fighting for a future. where both humans and aliens could coexist in peace. They reached a small crack in the fortress wall, just wide enough for one person to slip through at a time. Carter signaled for his team to stay put and entered first. The air inside was cool and damp, the faint sound of echoing footsteps reverberating through the corridors. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The mission was now in the most dangerous phase. Moving through the dark hallways, Carter's eyes adjusted to the low light. He could hear the distant voices of the Varen guards, unaware that a small group of humans had infiltrated their stronghold. His team moved with precision, avoiding detection. Their footsteps almost silent against the stone floor. As they neared the prison cells, Carter's heart rate quickened. The tension in the air was thick with anticipation. They had come this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. The princess was in one of these cells. They just had to find her. "Stay sharp," Carter whispered, his voice low. He motioned for the team to spread out and search for the cell holding Princess Lyra. The soldiers moved quickly, their guns at the ready, eyes darting in every direction. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The silence was unbearable. Carter's mind raced with thoughts of the princess. Was she still alive? Had the Varen done something to her? Couldn't let himself think like that. Not yet. He had to focus. Then, just as his hope began to waver, one of the soldiers signaled from the far end of the hallway. "Found it," the soldier whispered. Carter's heart skipped a beat as he sprinted toward the sound of the soldier's voice. He reached the cell door and looked inside. There, huddled in the corner of the small cell, was Princess Lyra. Her once vibrant blue skin was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. But when she saw the human soldiers, her expression shifted from terror to confusion. Who are you?" she asked in a shaky voice, her words barely a whisper. "We're here to rescue you," Carter said gently, his tone soft but firm. He stepped forward slowly, offering her a hand. "Come with us. We'll get you out of here." Lyra stared at him for a moment, her eyes searching his face. There was a flicker of recognition, but it was clear she was unsure if she could trust him. After all, she had no reason to believe that humans would help her. For all she knew, they were just another enemy. But Carter's sincerity shone through. Slowly, cautiously, Lyra stood up and took his hand. The touch was tentative at first, but then she held on tighter, as if realizing that she wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't trapped. She wasn't powerless. She was being saved. "I'm Princess Lyra," she said quietly. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Carter replied with a reassuring smile. "We'll get you out of here. You're safe now." As Carter led her out of the cell, he glanced over his shoulder. His team was close behind, covering every corner and making sure no Varen soldiers were nearby. The mission wasn't over yet, but they had made it this far. Now, they just had to get back to their ship and leave the enemy stronghold behind. But as Carter looked at the princess, he realized that the bond between them, though new, was already growing stronger. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about something more: trust, hope, and a future where enemies could work together. For the first time, he truly believed it was possible. The air inside the fortress was cold and silent. Sergeant James Carter could feel the tension in his body as he led Princess Lyra through the dark, narrow hallways. Her small hand gripped his tightly, and he could feel her trembling. The sounds of the Varen guards echoed through the corridors. But they were staying out of sight for now. Carter moved swiftly, his mind focused entirely on getting Lyra to safety. The mission was far from over. It had only just begun. They had to cross through the fortress and make it back to their transport. A small ship waiting for them outside the enemy walls. Time was running out. The longer they stayed, the more likely it was that the Varen would catch on to their plan. Princess Lyra was quiet, but Carter could sense the fear in her. She was in a strange world now, far from her home, and she didn't know who to trust. But her gaze was fixed on him, and there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. He knew she was scared, but she was also strong. She had been through so much already, and he was determined not to let her suffer anymore. "We're almost there," Carter said quietly, glancing back at her as they moved through the shadowy hallways. "Just a little further," Lyra nodded, but her face remained tense, her sharp alien features etched with worry. She had been held captive for so long, far from her family, and now everything seemed so unfamiliar. She wasn't sure if she could ever go back to the life she once knew. The journey to freedom was always more difficult than it seemed. Every step felt like a risk. Carter knew it wasn't just about getting out. It was about staying alive long enough to escape. And even then, the dangers weren't over. As they moved through the corridors, they encountered several guards. Carter's team took them down quickly, but the firefights were brief and loud. Lyra winced at the sound of gunfire, clutching Carter's arm a little harder. He kept moving, never slowing down, keeping his eyes on the mission. "We need to get to the exit." "Stay close," Carter said, his voice calm but firm. He had been in worse situations before, but this time it was different. He had someone worth fighting for. The team pushed forward, the princess in tow. But even as they neared the exit, things weren't as simple as they had hoped. A squad of Varan's soldiers appeared, blocking the way. They had to move fast, but the enemy was too close. Carter quickly assessed the situation. "Take cover," he shouted. Soldiers scattered, diving behind crates and debris. The air filled with the sound of gunfire as the Varan soldiers began shooting. The tension was thick, and Carter's heart pounded in his chest. He moved to the front, his weapon ready, determined to protect the princess. Lyra was watching him, her eyes wide with fear. "Will we be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We will," Carter answered firmly, though he knew there was no guarantee. He didn't have time to think about anything other than the mission. He had to keep her safe. That was all that mattered now. The firefight continued for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. Carter and his team fought hard, taking down the Varan one by one. They moved as a unit, the sound of gunfire filling the air. Carter could feel the sweat on his brow, his muscles aching from the constant motion. But there was no time to rest. Not now, not when Lyra's life was in his hands. "Move," Carter yelled, pulling Lyra to her feet and pushing forward. They had to make it to the exit. There was no time to waste. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they broke through the outer gates of the fortress. The air was fresher here, the jungle stretching out before them. The sound of the battle seemed to fade behind them as they ran, the adrenaline in their bodies pushing them forward. Carter's ship was waiting in the distance, just as planned. But they still weren't safe. There was always something more. The Varan would send reinforcements, and they would have to fight their way through again. Carter glanced back, making sure his team was still with him, before he turned to Lyra. "We're almost there," he said, trying to give her some reassurance. "Stay with me." Lyra nodded, but her gaze was distant. She had lived through horrors that no one should have to experience, and she wasn't sure what was waiting for her on the other side. But for now, there was one thing that she knew for. Sure, she wasn't alone. She had a chance to go home, to see her mother again. And maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a better future. The journey to the ship was perilous, but they finally reached it. The small vessel hummed with energy, its engines glowing softly in the night. Carter rushed aboard, helping Lyra inside, followed by his team. Once everyone was on board, the ship's door closed behind them with a soft hiss. The engines roared to life, and the ship began to lift off. As the ground of the enemy planet fell away beneath them, Carter let out a long breath. They had made it. For now, they were safe. But the war was far from over. Lyra sat silently by the window, looking out at the stars. Carter could see the faint reflection of her face in the glass, her eyes filled with thoughts that he couldn't quite reach. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but he knew it wouldn't be that simple. The road ahead would be long. The Varan were ruthless, and the war wasn't over. For now, they had won. They had taken the first step toward a new beginning. As the ship sped through space, Carter turned to Lyra. "We're going to get you home," he said, his voice steady. "I promise." Lyra didn't say anything at first, but then she met his eyes. There was a glimmer of gratitude in her expression, flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was the first time she had smiled since her capture. "Thank you," she whispered. Carter smiled back, the weight of their journey still heavy on his shoulders. It's not over yet, he said, but he couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. For now, they were safe. For now, the future looked just a little bit brighter. The stars outside the ship's window were a blur as the vessel sped through space. Princess Lyra sat quietly, her eyes lost in the view of the galaxy. It had been a long and tiring journey, but the real battle was still ahead. She was being taken home, but she couldn't shake the worry that weighed heavily on her heart. What would she return to? Would her mother be safe? Would her people survive the enemy's attacks? The Varen were still a powerful force, and though she was free now, the war was far from over. Sergeant James Carter stood nearby, his eyes on the control panel in front of him, but his thoughts were far from the mission. He couldn't help but glance at Lyra from time to time, noticing the sadness in her eyes. He had seen pain before. It was something that came with the job, but this felt different. This wasn't just about fighting an enemy. This was about saving someone who had lost. So much, Lyra had been through more than anyone should have to face. He understood the pain of losing loved ones. He had lost people too. His own family had been affected by the wars on Earth, and though his wounds were healed, the scars remained. This mission, however, had become more personal. He wasn't just saving an alien princess, he was giving hope to someone who had lost everything. The ship's engines hummed softly, but inside the silence between them felt heavy. The weight of their mission hung in the air. There was no time for comfort, no room for distraction. They had to reach the Tyleth homeworld and get Lyra back to her mother. The Queen needed to know her daughter was safe, but Carter knew there were no guarantees. Back on the planet Zaladar, Queen Valara paced restlessly through her private chambers. She had been waiting for news for days, and the uncertainty was slowly driving her mad. The pain of losing her daughter had not left her, and now she was torn between holding on to hope and preparing for the worst. Her people needed her, but how could she lead them when the most important person in her life was missing? Her advisors came and went, but Valara could hardly focus on their words. She didn't want to hear about their plans to fight the Varen. She didn't care about their strategies or their new weapons. All she cared about was finding Lyra. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She had been through many battles, and she had always found a way to fight through the pain. But this was different. This wasn't just about the survival of her people. This was about her daughter, her blood, the one person she loved above all others, the one person who had always been by her side. "Your Majesty," came a soft voice from the doorway. Valara turned to see her trusted General Kalen standing in the entrance. His face was grim, but there was a look of determination in his eyes. "I've just received word from our allies," he said, stepping into the room. "There is a ship on its way back to us. It carries the princess." Valara's heart skipped a beat. She felt a rush of emotions flood through her: relief, joy, fear. She couldn't believe it. After so much time, after all the pain, Lyra was coming home? But was she safe? Would she return to her mother whole, or would she be broken by the horrors she had endured? "Is she?" Valara began, her voice shaky. "She is alive, Your Majesty," Kalen interrupted. "She has been rescued by the human soldier, Sergeant James Carter. He led the mission to bring her back." Valara's mind raced as she absorbed the information. A human soldier? She had heard of humans in the galaxy, but they were distant. Allies, she hadn't expected them to be the ones to help her daughter. But if they had saved her, then the Queen owed them a great debt. "Where is she now?" Valara asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions within her. "She is on her way," Kalen said. "The ship should arrive within the hour." Valara's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. She would not let her people see her weakness. She had to remain strong, not just for herself, but for her daughter. She had to be the queen her people needed her to be. Back aboard the ship, Carter checked the systems one last time. They were approaching Zaladar's orbit, and he could feel the weight of the moment. He had done his part. He had kept Lyra safe, and now it was time to hand her over to her mother. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It had been a dangerous mission, but it had worked. They had succeeded. Lyra sat quietly next to him, still staring out the window at the distant planet. She hadn't said much since they had left. The fortress and Carter knew she was lost in her thoughts. He respected her silence, but he couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. Would she be okay? Would she ever be able to forget what had happened? "Are you all right?" Carter asked softly, breaking the silence. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude but also sadness. She nodded slowly, but her expression didn't change. "I don't know if I'll ever be all right," she said quietly. "I've lost so much. My mother. My people." Carter understood. He had been where she was, felt that same emptiness. But he also knew that things could get better, even if it took time. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "You have your mother, your people, and you have us. You have a chance to rebuild." Lyra looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Thank you," she whispered to Carter. Nodded, giving her a small smile. "No need to thank me. I'm just doing my job." The ship descended slowly toward the surface of Zalidar. The lights of the planet below sparkled like stars, and Carter couldn't help but admire the beauty of it. But his focus remained on the mission. They had made it this far, and now it was time to complete the final step. As the ship landed, the doors opened, and Carter stepped out first, scanning the area for any signs of danger. He had to make sure everything was safe before they could bring Lyra to her mother. His team followed closely behind, and soon they were all standing. In the cool night air of Zalidar, then, out of the shadows, Valara appeared. The queen, tall and strong, her face a mask of worry and hope, stepped forward to meet her daughter. The moment their eyes met, Lyra rushed forward, and the two embraced, tears flowing freely between them. "I never thought I would see you again," Valara whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm home, Mom," Lyra said, her voice trembling with emotion. I'm finally home." Carter stood back, watching the reunion unfold before him. He had done what he set out to do. He had brought her home, but there was still a long road ahead. The Varen were still out there, and the war was far from over. However, in this moment, at least for now, it felt like there was hope. And for the first time in a long while, Carter allowed himself to believe in that hope too. The sun had just begun to rise on the planet Zalidar, casting a golden glow across the sky. Queen Valara stood outside her palace, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Her heart was heavy, but today, something felt different. The wait was almost over. After days of not knowing whether her daughter was alive, after hours of worrying, the moment had finally come. Lyra was on her way home. Carter stood behind her, watching the queen's expression change. She had been strong for her people, leading them through countless battles, but now could see the vulnerability in her eyes. The love she had for her daughter was evident, and he understood that in this moment, nothing else mattered. "Your Majesty," Carter said, his voice soft yet respectful. "We'll be landing soon." Valara nodded without turning to face him. She didn't need to say anything. Carter could see the relief and joy written all over her face. The queen had always been a fierce leader, but he could see the mother in her now. "I can't believe she's coming back," Valara whispered, almost to herself. Carter watched as she took a deep breath, gathering her strength. She was still the ruler of her people, but in this moment, she was simply a mother who had almost lost her child. He had seen many leaders strong, wise, and determined, but there was something special about Valara. She had led her people through war and darkness, and yet her love for her daughter was a reminder that even the strongest hearts could be torn by the ones they loved most. The ship landed softly behind them, its engines humming as it touched down. Carter's heart skipped a beat. It was finally happening. The doors of the ship opened, and there, standing in the doorway, was Lyra. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. Lyra's eyes met her mother's, and Valara's breath caught in her throat. She had longed for this moment, dreamed of it, but now that it was here, it felt almost too real to be true. "Mom," Lyra whispered, her voice shaking as she took the first step toward her mother. Lyra ran into her arms, and Valara caught her in a fierce embrace. The two held each other tightly, as if afraid to let go. Tears fell from Valara's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "I thought I had lost you forever," Valara said, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't bear it. I'm here," Lyra whispered back. "I'm here, and I'm safe." Thanks to him, Lyra turned to look at Carter, her face filled with gratitude. Valara followed her gaze, and her eyes softened as she saw the human soldier standing a few feet away. He had kept his promise. He had brought her daughter back. Carter stood still, watching the family reunion. He knew his part in this mission was done, but he couldn't help but feel a connection to them. He had given everything to ensure Lyra's safety, and now, seeing the queen and princess together again, he knew it had been worth it. "You have my deepest gratitude, Sergeant." "Carter," Valara said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "you brought my daughter home. I will never forget what you've done for us." Carter nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It was my honor, Your Majesty. I was just doing my job." But Valara wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her eyes locking with his. "No," she said firmly. "You did more than that. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me back my family." She paused, her gaze softening. "For that, you will always have a place here, among my people." Carter felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't used to this kind of gratitude. It wasn't why he did what he did. But hearing it from Valara, seeing how much it meant to her, made it all the more meaningful. I don't know what to say," he said, his voice quiet. "You don't need to say anything," Valara replied. "You have already done more than enough." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes bright with tears, and hugged Carter gently. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. She didn't have to say anything either. The gratitude was clear in her eyes. She was finally home, and she would never forget the soldier who had saved her life. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come," Lyra said softly, her voice trembling. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Carter couldn't help but smile. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his voice reassuring. "I just did what needed to be done." But deep down he knew that this mission would stay with him forever. It wasn't just about the battle or the enemy or even the war. It was about something deeper. It was about the connections made, the lives saved, and the hope given to those who needed it most. Later that evening, as the sun began to set over the rolling hills of Zaladar, Valara stood at the edge of her palace's balcony, watching the stars. Her heart felt full, lighter than it had in days. Her daughter was safe. She was home. Behind her, Carter stood quietly, giving her the space she needed. But his presence brought comfort to her. She had never expected to be in this position. Had always been the one to lead her people, to make the tough decisions. But now, she realized she wasn't alone. She had allies. She had a future to look forward to. "How did you do it?" Valara asked, her voice soft as she turned to Carter. "How did you keep her safe?" Carter stepped forward, his expression serious. "I just kept my focus. Couldn't let anything happen to her." Valara nodded slowly. "You're a good man, Sergeant Carter. I see that now more than ever." Carter wasn't sure how to respond. He wasn't used to such praise, but he had done something important. He had made a difference. "You did more than anyone could have expected," Valara continued, her eyes filled with a quiet admiration, "and for that, I will be forever grateful." As the evening wore on, Carter stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the peaceful land of Zaladar. He felt a sense of pride, a sense of accomplishment, but also something else, something that wasn't easy to define. He had been part of something much bigger than himself. He had saved the princess, and in doing so, he had helped bring hope to a people who had lost so much. Lyra, standing beside her mother, smiled as she watched him. She knew that Carter was more than just a soldier. He was a symbol of the hope that had returned to her world. And as she looked at him, she knew that they would never forget him, no matter what happened next. The days after Lyra's return were filled with both celebration and uncertainty. Queen Valara had called for a grand ceremony to honor the return of her daughter, but it wasn't just about the princess. It was about rebuilding hope. Hope that had been shattered by the war. Hope that had been kept alive by those who fought for a better future. Carter had stayed in the palace for a few days after the rescue, watching as the bond between the queen and her daughter grew stronger with every passing hour. It was a reunion that was beautiful in its simplicity. No words could fully express the love they had for each other. It had been a long time since they had seen each other, and there were moments of silence between them, but Carter could feel the deep, unspoken connection. But soon, Carter knew his part in their story was over. His mission had been completed. Lyra was safe, and the queen had her daughter back. Still, he felt a strong sense of loyalty to both of them. It wasn't just about saving Lyra, it was about helping Valara, about seeing the joy on her face when she saw her daughter again. It had meant something more than any mission he had ever completed before. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the vast plains of Zaladar, Carter stood by the balcony of his quarters. The quiet was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos. Of the past few days, it had been a long time since he had felt this kind of calm. He thought about Earth, about his family, and about the life he had left behind to join this mission. It wasn't easy being away from home, but he had a sense of purpose now, one that gave him strength. "Sergeant Carter," a voice called out behind him. Carter turned to see Queen Valara approaching him. She looked as regal as ever, but there was a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. He had seen her lead her people with unmatched strength, but now he saw the warmth of a mother who had reclaimed what she loved most. "Your Majesty?" Carter said, bowing slightly. Valara gave him a small smile and stepped closer. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not just for bringing Lyra home, but for your strength. You made a choice to save my daughter, even though you had nothing to gain." Carter shook his head. "It was my duty. And besides, I couldn't let her stay with the enemy." Valara nodded, understanding the weight of what Carter had done. "You are a man of honor, Sergeant," she said, "and I won't forget that. You have a place here, always. You and your people will always be welcome." Carter hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. He wasn't used to such praise, especially from someone as powerful as Valara. "I appreciate that, Your Majesty," he replied, his voice sincere. "But my duty is to Earth. I can't stay." Valara's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "I understand. But you have a bond with us now, and no distance can change that. You are part of our family now, in a way. And if there is ever a need, if Earth ever needs our help, you can count on us." The words meant more than Carter expected. He'd always known his mission here was temporary. But hearing Valara's words made him feel like his work had truly mattered. It was more than just a mission to him. Now it was about the people he had met, the lives he had touched. "Thank you," Carter said quietly. "It means a lot to hear that." Valara smiled, and for a moment the two stood in silence, watching the sunrise. It was peaceful here, and it reminded Carter of the life he had left behind. But he couldn't stay forever. There was still much to do, both on Earth and in the galaxy. As the sun rose higher, Valara turned to him again. "You've done more for us than you'll ever know, Sergeant," she said. "Now, it's time for you to go home. But always know that the door here is open to you." Later that day, Carter stood at the edge of the palace's landing platform, looking out at the vast landscape of Zaladar. The city below him was bustling with activity, but there was a calmness in the air that he couldn't ignore. The war was far from over, but the Tyleth had a new sense of hope. The queen had her daughter back, and the people were beginning to rebuild. Lyra had insisted on joining him to say goodbye. She stood beside him now, her face thoughtful as she looked out over the land. Her time with Carter had been brief, but it had changed her in ways she couldn't yet understand. She had been through so much, and meeting someone like Carter had given her a new perspective on life. "Are you really going?" Lyra asked softly, her voice carrying a mix of sadness and curiosity. Carter turned to look at her. "Yes, my job here is done. I've got a duty to get back to Earth." Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for everything. I don't think I could ever repay you." "You don't need to," Carter replied, offering her a smile. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." Lyra paused, as if thinking about something important. I think I'll never forget you, Sergeant Carter. You've shown me what real bravery is. Carter didn't know how to respond to that. He had never thought of himself as a hero. He was just a soldier, doing his job. But seeing the way Lyra looked at him, he realized that he had made a real difference. And that meant something more than any award or honor ever could. You've got your whole life ahead of you, he said, his voice warm with sincerity. Go back to your people. Lead them. They need you. Lyra smiled, though there was still sadness in her eyes. I will, but I'll never forget what you did for me. With that, the two of them stood together in silence, watching as the sun began to set over the horizon. Carter knew that his journey here had ended, but the connections he had made would last. He had made a difference in their lives, and that was something he could carry with him as the ship prepared to take off. Carter gave one last look at the planet he had helped save. He had done his part, and now it was time to go home. He knew that the future was uncertain, but he also knew that no matter what, there was hope in the galaxy. And sometimes that was enough.